Good evening, Brad.
Hi, Nancy. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Good.
Hey, John. Hey, Nancy.
Hey, Chris, how's it going?
Great. Got to the right place.
Good.
I know Beth said she'll be on at like 6 exactly, and
No problem.
everybody else should be on soon. I just got in early to make sure everything was working. I'm mobile, so that's all right. Yeah. All right.
So just this is Nancy, a couple of housekeeping items. I'm gonna make our consultant, Beth Vogelsang, the host, and then Reese is the co-host, and then enjoy your meeting, and I will be exiting.
Hey, Nancy.
You should be good to go, Beth.
Okay, wonderful. I will get things ready here and we'll give folks just a few minutes to. Hey, John, you just let us know whenever you'd like to start. You're welcome. Start things off and I'll share the screen.
All right, I think we'll need to wait a little bit more. I
Sure.
think we had quite a list of people to invite, so I'm hoping that a few more we'll be able to get on here in a few minutes here. All right, well, it's 7 minutes past the hour, so I think we'll need to get started then.
All right, sounds great. I'm gonna share my screen here with everyone. Should be seeing it.
We see it.
Cancel. Don't leave meeting. All righty. Okay, so all right, so John, I'll let you just sort of kick things off and say hello. And we're just have a short and sweet meeting agenda, but lots of things we can talk about.
Great, Beth. So if you don't know me, but you probably should, my name is John Voboril, and I am a senior planner in the Community Development Department. I have had many conversations with various board members, whether it's Parks and Rec, Planning and Zoning, or ETAC, or sustainability about the corridors that run from Broadway to Englewood Station, primarily through walk and wheel planning. And over those conversations, I've heard much about how people feel significant dissatisfaction with the current state of existing conditions there in terms of safety for Englewood Parkway, and the fact that it's very hard to navigate or know where you're supposed to go with Little Dry Creek Trail. And so I heard that loud and clear, and I started thinking that we need to look for some money to do some planning for these corridors. And so we were able to get a grant, Dr. Cog, to do this. And we've hired OV Consulting to be our lead consultant on this project. And basically we have two goals in mind. The first goal is short-term improvements. What can we do tomorrow that will make things better, make the existing conditions better than we have today? And there's been a lot of experimentation in the city and county of Denver regarding simple improvements such as posts and paint and different things to keep people and cars separated that aren't really all that expensive. So we're going to be looking at those. And then we also know that redevelopment is coming to this area. We're working on city center redevelopment. And we also know that farther east that Hobby Lobby and Big Lots have now vacated those shopping centers. And so those shopping centers are ripe for redevelopment as well. So the second prong of the project is to look at the long-term corridor and what long-term vision for these corridors, and what does the people of Englewood want to see, and how do they want it to feel like, and how they want it to operate. And so this is your chance to tell Beth and Reese. They'll give you a little bit of a presentation, a little bit of feel of how the project has progressed, and then they'll have a series of questions, and they're hoping to get some feedback from you about what you'd like to see long-term for these corridors. And so now I'll turn it over to Beth.
Thank you. All right, so yes, I'm Beth Vogelsang with OV Consulting, and with me tonight is Reese Shaw. He's an urban planner in our office. And Chris Vogelsang, also, who's our traffic engineer, will join us for a few minutes at the front end of this meeting to talk through some of these long-term. He's going to be, he's in transit. So, all right, let's go to, sorry about that. Let's go to the project purpose here. So just a reminder, and John pretty much gave this away already, but we're looking at analyzing some alternative designs for Englewood Parkway, and how that intersects with Little Dry Creek, and what we want in this area over the long term for our vision, but also maybe some things we can look at in the short term. So through this course, we've looked at previous documents and previous planning efforts, and by the time we get through this, we'll also be heading towards some opportunities for public and community feedback on things as well. So our study area is really what you see there in red. We're focused on Englewood Parkway itself, really from the station to Broadway or down Tacoma to Broadway. But we look at this piece of roadway in the context of the whole area. So from the city center into downtown and all the way to the wellness district. In terms of our schedule, we've been working on things this year, really starting primarily in January, doing some of this initial work, holding some of our internal advisory committee meetings, talking to the EDDA board and others. And as you can see, we're approaching the end into April, May, and June, where we're here at our CAC meeting tonight with all of you and heading into our community meeting on May 18th. So hopefully coming up on some final ideas. So tonight's meeting is really important in that we hear your ideas and what you're thinking for this parkway and surrounding area. So with that, the first thing on our list here is to jump into this notion of short-term alternatives. And so I'm going to let Chris speak to those a little bit here.
Yeah, all right. Hey, hey everybody. Good to sort of see you all again. Virtual Age is awesome. I'm on soccer kid duty today, but I'm able to do this, and super excited about the work we've been doing on Englewood Parkway. It's definitely needed, and excited about the opportunities. So short-term alternatives, one of the things we were asked to do is, you know, what could you do in the near term in an inexpensive way to kind of make things better along Englewood Parkway and make connections, pedestrian, bicycle, transit, the modes there that we really want to emphasize. And so we took a look at it. What you see on the bottom there is sort of an issues map, basically, that we developed and kind of worked through as a team. And kind of key goals we came up with were like, let's try to calm traffic. Let's get speeds down, get turning speeds down, especially with through speeds, get some greater consistency. There's a lot of different things going on. We have kind of looked at each block separately, and each block is sort of unique in this area. Really want to increase visibility and safety and comfort for pedestrians and cyclists. We've heard that it feels kind of like a big long ways from the station over to Broadway, and you feel kind of lost in there, and increase walkability for sure. So those are our kind of key issues. And I just want to run through, I think we have three key things I just want to share to give you an idea of what we're doing. So what you're seeing here is an example of probably what a deliverable will be from us. So this is on top of an aerial, and this is we've done some actual CAD design here and looking at, you know, what could we do easily. And this is about traffic calming. What I want to emphasize here is there's kind of see in the middle, this is the Walmart parking lot. We have kind of a weird mix of things going on here. There are some sort of ownership and like permissions issues here, but in general, and the theme is to try to consolidate some of those driveways, but really that you'll see those kind of speed tables there on the north-south ped connections. The idea is some kind of vertical deflection to get the speeds down and make it really visible that those are connections. We've been talking with Public Works about this. This was his initial concept. Some of the refinements we've made in there are trying to maybe move those away from the crossings and make them have pass-throughs for emergency vehicles, fire trucks and stuff. So the fire truck width is a little wider than a regular vehicle. And so we're trying to not impact their ability to move through the space while still getting the speed reduction we're looking for. So that's one idea in terms of traffic calming. That's a consistent theme. Go to the next one. So the roundabout, right? So the roundabout was done basically when City Center was last, you know, when the mall kind of changed and this all got redeveloped. Our impression is this was designed for much higher traffic volumes than exists today as we kind of look at this, and a much different vehicle type. And so the way it's designed today, it's really set up to accommodate large trucks making turns in here. You know, we do have the RTD bus routes going through here, but we don't really have a lot of service vehicles going through here. And this is a big impediment to pedestrian, especially pedestrian, but also bicycle movements through here because it's high speed. You can go through there. If you're like going north, you want to make the right, you probably go 40 miles an hour through there really fast. And so what we're showing here is some very simple paint and post, we call them, kind of improvements where we would tighten up the circle with some vertical, you know, those flexi posts you might see around. We tighten up the entries so that you can't enter so fast. And we want to match the entry speed to the circulating speed for safety, right? The other thing we're showing here is we're actually, if you've been walked through there, you notice that those pedestrian crosswalks are really far back from the roundabout, and it's a lot of out of direction travel. I want to really tighten those up. So this is an example of just some kind of inexpensive things we can do to try to get speeds down, calm traffic, and make it a little more inviting in the short term. I go to the next one. So the next is we kind of looked at bike facilities through here. There is a lot of pavement width in I'd say 2/3 of the blocks have quite a bit of pavement width that maybe we could repurpose. On the right side there, you'd see that's Englewood Parkway east of Cherokee, right, to Broadway. We have a 4-lane section. It's sort of a parkway section. And we don't think that capacity is necessary. And so we looked at, could we repurpose that space while still maintaining access to the transit stops and make it safer, bring the speeds down, and make that happen. So that's an example of that work. That's the same kind of thing. There aren't any like concrete or asphalt changes. That's all paint and post, very simple, inexpensive. And also the nice thing is you can test it, right? So you can test it, and if you don't like it or if you want to modify it, it's easy to change. It's not really like a 20-year investment. And on the left picture there, kind of see the same thing. Repurposing space east of Eladi there, I believe that is, taking that kind of curbside space and making it a space for bikes and peds. So those are kind of 3 themes. We've been, just so everybody knows, we've been working closely with Public Works and planning to try to integrate these. These have sort of planning goals and then operational implications. And so we're kind of working through that, but we are kind of doing that. We have the expertise to kind of do those sort of analyses and make sure that emergency vehicles, the bus, those things can still do what they need to do while we kind of get this together. So that's high level. I don't know how you run on this, Beth, if you're just going through the presentation, doing questions or.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I think at this point, before we switch gears to sort of more long-term visioning, we definitely want to open it up to any questions about just some of these possibilities that Chris and the team and our also Kevin, I guess, is on the call with us as well. So both folks working on this. Does anyone have questions for them or other thoughts? Okay, I see a hand up with Brenda. Why don't you go ahead? Thanks for raising your hand.
Yeah, are you talking about those plastic sticks like Denver's using for traffic calming?
Yeah, so we don't, I know we said Denver before. We know Englewood's not trying to be Denver, totally get it. But yes, if you wanted an example, that'd be a great example of something out in the world right now. They're made from PVC. They sort of, if you hit them, they sort of bend so they don't cause vehicle damage, but they're substantial enough that people generally tend to avoid hitting them unless it's like 2 a.m. and they're partying and they decide they want to hit all of them. We have had that happen, so. And Chris Dietrich.
Yes, hello. Thank you for being here tonight. I know, especially Chris, you kind of time crunch and got a lot going on. I've loved that we're working on this project. I know we've done some stuff with you guys in the past, and I've liked the way that we're looking at the kind of short term and the long term opportunities here with some of this stuff. I've got a couple of questions and feedback. I want to make sure I give it at the right time. But first, I was kind of curious. I see some great signs up here already, and I'm curious kind of how far along we are. What I know there's another step in the process, the public input, but is this part of an initial deliverable here? Is this sort of like an initial mock-up before you guys dive into it? I'm just curious how far along.
Great question. I think if I restate, you tell me if I'm right. So I think what we're asking is, how close are we to being able to do something, right? To install something? That's kind of what you're getting at. What are the steps?
Yes. Yeah. What's the maturity of the plan that we're seeing on the page here today?
Okay. So yeah, we just showed you pieces of that plan. So what I would say, so we're at concept design, but this concept design is pretty detailed. So we've laid it out in AutoCAD. We've run turning analyses. We've done some pretty detailed analysis. There's a little more that needs to be done. But in terms of having a realistic and implementable concept, I think we're pretty close. And then from there, it really depends on the city and what implementation path they go, right? So if you end up, if the city decides they want to hire a contractor to install these sort of things, then you need a little more formal plan set with quantities and bid items, right? That we can work that through. If the city forces do it, which generally hasn't been the case in our experience, usually it's kind of a contractor thing, then the plans don't have to be as developed. But I think the next steps, to your point, are we really are right in the middle of working with Victor's team at Public Works about making sure these ideas work for the needs of the area, including the bikes and peds, right? And then I would say, you could be, I didn't see any reason why this year some things couldn't happen. And I know from talking to John, I think there's some budget, a line item budget set aside for some improvements. And I don't know if this is a candidate for that, but in this year's budget. So that's how I feel about it. But I'm not city leadership. I know Sean's on here and Victor too. And so.
Well, thank you for providing a little more color on that.
Yeah, you bet.
By the way, I'm on the ETAC Transportation Committee.
Yes, I totally remember you. Yep, we've met before.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think part of the short-term stuff, I wonder, what can we do for testing as part of the longer-term vision, and kind of how does that fit together? And so just thinking about, I see you've closed down some lanes on here. That's stuff we've talked about in other plans that we've worked on. But Floyd is another street that we were looking at doing some of that work as well. And I like seeing some of that. I think the challenges with some of the private businesses, like the Walmart access, will be, that's for the city to work on as well. I know that's not fully your job, and I'm sure John will do a great job in navigating some of that. But I think some focus on bicycling. If there's a way, the bicycles, especially on the roundabout, I think longer term is, Englewood Parkway is kind of this promenade between the light rail and Old Town Englewood, Old Downtown. And, that first block outside of the city center feels a little bit more pedestrian friendly or focused with the wider sidewalks and stuff. So I'm wondering if there's any way that is part of this early preliminary thing that you guys might be able to provide some options for making that more of a place that people feel comfortable with. And I think the bigger picture here is we've got this area that is so car centric, and you look at these satellite pictures and like half of the parking lots are empty or more, right?
Yeah.
So, it's not being utilized the best way, which is why we're doing this project. But anything with the bikes kind of between the light rail and Old Englewood, I think would be good to add. I don't know what the options are in the roundabout, but I was also curious if you were doing any of this preliminary work on the Dry Creek Trail part, or if we're just focusing on Englewood Parkway for this section right now.
Yeah, Beth can probably answer that better.
Yeah. I think that's a great question. Specifically tonight, we're focused on the Parkway and the surrounding area, the intersection of Little Dry Creek, but not getting into too many details on Little Dry Creek itself for tonight.
Well, and then I just went to your first part of your question. I think about, what are we going to learn from this that might apply to the future? And I think some of these early implementation items we're talking about that are kind of inexpensive, I think we can get a sense of, the demand, right? So we're talking about making a much more protected and safe bicycle facility all the way from the station over to Broadway, and eventually into the wellness district as that Old Hamden project goes on. And I think you'll start to see people are starting to feel comfortable. This is a good investment. And then the other thing, Chris, is I didn't show the whole plan, right? Because we didn't have that much time, but the idea is also at the intersections to really reduce the widths of the lanes, to reduce the turning speeds by, kind of decreasing the radii, like trying to make things tight. And I think we'll get to see if that makes people feel comfortable, and might give us some insight into, physical hardscape design that we would do in the future about what works. So I think it's all good. Okay. And just to be clear, the bike, like on the page we're looking, thank you for that. Yeah.
The bike lanes are between the hashed lines and the curb. Just, I want to make sure
Yeah,
I'm
so
looking
it's
at that right.
yeah, Chris, we can and I can share with you and go through the basically we're talking about trying to have a more of a high comfort facility from one end to the other. The block you like the best, right? That's the most pedestrian friendly, is the most space constrained, right? In terms of like getting the width in there. But yeah, we've come up with a plan for I'd say there's like buffered or possibly protected bike lanes depending on which way we go with the city, for probably 2/3 of the length. And then the western half, we've been talking about some options about how to get bikes and cars either to play together well or to separate. But some of those are a little trickier. So, but yeah, we'll as we develop the plan, we can share that. But I think you're right. I mean, it ties into the long-term vision that Beth's going to talk about, and I know we're excited to get to too. Do you mind if I ask Christine? I know you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, why don't you do the
Mhm.
long-term part and then I'll talk.
Okay. So anyway, are there any other questions about short-term?
Hey, Chris, you've kind
There.
of.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
That's why Beth and I are working together on this, is long-term, short-term engineering planning, right? So, okay, I'll shut up. You're muted too now, Beth. I think there might be a meeting setting that is muting all. Yeah, I'm able to unmute, and you may be able to too. All right, the host just muted me, so maybe Reese can help you out. He's co-host, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Seems like you
Yes,
have,
Reese.
yep, you have audio now. I'm looking at the participants now. I'll try to figure that out while you go ahead.
Okay, and can you hear me now too?
Yes.
All right, yeah, there's some asking everyone to mute situation going on. So, okay, so unless we have any specific last questions for Chris related to just the short term, I think it would be good for us to move on to more of the long-term thinking that we want to nail down tonight. But feel free. Just and through all this, you're welcome to just jump in, so don't feel that we can't come back to it. So let's talk some about this long-term visioning. I'm gonna share a few slides before we start sharing ideas. But when we think about the Parkway, like I said, we want to think about it in the context of all the way to the Wellness District. But specifically, we're talking about this piece here, which exists within City Center, and what we really want this to be, unlike what it is today. So we have divided this into 6 segments in order just to kind of understand parts and pieces. And the first couple of segments there are really connected to the redevelopment or the reimagining of the civic center area there. So this is being done separately or independent of this study itself, but we're all tying things together. So that's the current layout of what folks are thinking around the city center itself. And that occupies 1 and 2. So just kind of understanding how these pieces come together. And it sort of eliminates that loop around the park and instead just makes it park space there at the end of the street, sort of Englewood Parkway terminating into the park there. And then in segment 3, we have Walmart. And so that leaves us Walmart to think about 4, 5, and 6 as we sort of envision what we want this to be. Okay, the next piece of this is, as we started to evaluate this whole area, we really did a deep dive on some of the planning work that's been completed. There has been a lot going on. And so we're not starting from scratch. We're not just imagining anything, but we are trying to be creative. So out of all these plans that you see listed here, the map to your right sort of illustrates the key things that came out of those. We have in the purple dots some of those primary gateways that lead you into this area and that ought to be real points of connectivity and visibility as you come into the city center area. We also have recognition that this street in particular, the Parkway, is a high pedestrian priority. So bikes as well, but really emphasizing the comfort and safety of pedestrians through this area. So as we go forward, and certainly this is just a culmination of all these different things. We did want to highlight that one of the more recent studies, the Englewood Downtown Plan, is also something we're building off of. So we want to be consistent with what was identified in the downtown plan. So just for instance, the vibrancy of downtown, cultivating street level activation, a connected and multimodal downtown, and increasing safety and comfort. So of course, we're building on those same themes. A few issues here tonight. All right, so we have been having some project meetings with various members of our staff and the technical advisory committee, and like I had mentioned, having some conversations with the downtown districts board, and we've heard a lot of ideas, and this just represents sort of the culmination of those ideas coming together. Just to give us a sense, pedestrian activation right there at the top of the list with green space, and I think that's in direct contrast to sort of the sea of asphalt that we have out there right now. So those are two biggies, and I think those will be prevalent as we think about our long-term vision. Multimodal is extremely important. Connectivity, trails, parks, greenway. Those are the kinds of ideas that are really rising to the top as we start to shape this vision. Out of the conversations we have and out of the plans that we've used and all those words that you just saw, we do have some draft goals. Now, there's plenty of room for input on these goals, and we're happy to send them out to the group as well. But these are some that have kind of come out of it, and we do want you guys to feel free to jump in on these as well. So increasing comfortable multimodal transportation choices. That's pretty basic, but that sure is at the top of the list. Providing a continuous, hopefully visible connection between Englewood Station, downtown, and the wellness district. So that idea of linking these areas. Increasing publicly accessible green space. This is a hot topic, and so I don't know where we're going to put it, but we definitely want to think about that. Reconnecting Little Dry Creek through city center as a regional trail and local mobility or recreational asset. So that's kind of getting to your question about where does Little Dry Creek come into the picture here? And even though we're not going to go into a lot of depth on that tonight, it's just a component of that overall connectivity framework. Decreasing the urban heat island effect through increased tree canopy. Would love to hear some thoughts on that. That's one that's come up. Fostering a sense of place or some of that placemaking element through pedestrian-oriented mixed-use development. So thinking about our land use patterns and how they start to affect the place of Englewood Parkway. And then last but not least, strengthening public-private partnerships so we can explore ownership and development opportunities along the Parkway. So maybe we just take a minute. If you don't have comments now, you might have some by the end as we sort of explore these ideas a little more, but thought I might just see if anybody had anything in particular you thought might be missing from this list. I don't see any hands. All right, we'll keep going. All right. So when we started to think about our vision, right? Like, how are we going to break this up and really talk about vision? We sort of came up with 6 vision elements. And so these we'd like to talk about tonight and hoping you might weigh in on these. Yes, it's a multimodal corridor. So what does that mean to us? We need to think of multimodal connectivity in general for the whole area. Trails, we're going to speak to that a little bit. the placemaking component of this vision, the green or park space, and also our landscaping or tree canopy or native vegetation, those kinds of things. So let's jump into these a little bit. So when we had previous meetings and as we've started to gather input, we've asked some of these questions of the multimodal component. Is there a primary mode? So for instance, today it's pretty heavily vehicular. Does that remain in place, or is there a balance of modes? Do we care if there's a consistent street width, or does it vary in character along the corridor? And then of course, what is the role of that supporting land use in shaping this corridor? So as we've asked those questions, these are some of the answers we've heard. And I'll say that the balance of modes really has come across as being important to those we've spoken to so far. So it is no longer just a vehicular corridor. It's not an alternative to Hampton. It should be slower and it should balance the modes. So safe and comfortable facilities is also right up there at the top. The idea of mixed use to support that pedestrian activation or that feeling of activity along the street. Separated and directional bike facilities, we're going to explore that a little bit. That's kind of come out. We've also talked some about shared streets. And I think that the notion of having separated facilities tied more distinctly to the safe and comfortable facility types that people were looking for. Visible treatments, traffic calming, and really looking at our population we're serving, and in this case, notably seniors who are pretty prevalent in our downtown. So today in our parkway, this is one of the segments. I would love to draw your attention to the bottom of the screen that the right-of-way varies a lot today. So one of the things as we go forward with a vision would be sort of to settle on a desired vision for our right-of-way. It goes from 62 to 61 to 108. So it's all over the place, okay, in terms of what we have to work with. Essentially 2 lanes, some sidewalk space, and amenity zone today is what's out there. And we posed some ideas where we said, okay, well, can we look at a cross section that has 2 lanes of travel? Maybe we'd like to explore on-street parking or perhaps curbside management. So places where there are places to park on street that supports that land use pattern, or places where you're able to pull up and make deliveries, drop people, really manage that curb in a different way. We looked at bicycle facilities that are protected on street facilities in both directions, and then facilities that really are above curb, maybe a cycle track that's 2-way or 1-way, bi-directional. So those are some of the ideas we tossed around with folks. And as we collected their input, we sort of landed on something that's a little more like this. And so we're going to walk through this. Perhaps we can get our 2 travel lanes down to 10 feet. So a more narrow travel lane that encourages us to go a little slower. We have room for parking. Again, that parking could be also curbside activities like delivery, Uber drop off. There's lots of ways you can manage that curb length there. We have landscape zone, which gives us opportunity to incorporate native vegetation or that tree canopy if that's of interest to us. That's typically in the ballpark of about 8 feet. In this case, we've put those protected bike lanes above the curb as opposed to down on the street with the parking, simply because we heard a lot about safety and the balance of modes and making this as comfortable as possible. So that's where those are located right now. We have a little buffer there, could be there, could not be there. And then we have this idea of a 10-foot sidewalk. So a nice, wide, comfortable walking space that edges up to our adjacent land use. So I might pause there and kind of get your reaction to some of this. You love it, you hate it, what do you like about it? Where, do you feel like, this reflects the comments we've heard to date, but what are your comments and your input on sort of a long-term vision for this area. All right, you have to speak. So let's talk a little first about the idea of separated bike and pedestrian facilities. Are we in agreement that these should be, you know, two separated distinct facilities, not a sharing of those facilities?
I think it depends how it's done. If it is like this, then that looks fine. If pedestrians and bicyclists are together, but the path is really wide, like on Cherry Creek, that also seems fine. It is super popular. No one races their bike there. They know that it's a mix of bikes and pedestrians, both, but everybody likes it. So if it's either like this or like that, I like that. The thing that I think would be a not good outcome is if it stays more like in the short-term plan where it's just some bike lanes on the street and some sidewalks. Because it would be an improvement over what we have today. It would be safer to bike on, but it would absolutely not be enjoyable to bike on. So you'd get the fraction of the population that needs to get somewhere where they're going, but you wouldn't get families going out for a bike ride. No way. And we would still be left with this little dry creek that just ends, and then these random streets that are unpleasant, and then trying to make your way over to the Platte somehow. So that's kind of how I would rank those options, like this or together, as long as it's wide enough. And then in last place, bike lanes on the street level that are separate from the pedestrians.
Thank you. That's some great feedback. Yeah, and I think that's consistent with the input we've had. Is this should be for all users. This has to be very comfortable. We want people to come to these buildings, whatever they are. We want them to feel like they can get there with their family, with their grandma, with whomever. So yeah, okay, that's really good feedback. Anyone else? Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. I like the wide sidewalks. I'm curious, and I don't know if you have the answer, maybe John would, but you know, how that might play with setbacks from the street. Are we looking at from, you know, in this view, we see a restaurant or something on the left, but in the background, you know, would that building potentially be directly up against the sidewalk?
So you're asking if the build, yeah, Reese, go ahead.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the zoning for this district. It's MU 1 or 2 or B. I forget exactly which MU it was, but I think the maximum setback was 15 feet. And so what you're seeing here on the right side of this is exactly 15 feet. And on the left side where you see that outdoor dining area, I took a little bit of liberty, and that's 20 feet. So I basically the maximum would be 15 feet all the way up to 0 feet setback.
Okay.
John's
yeah, and
nodding.
They're and that's subject to change, as those things are with some of you know, the buildings too, and the planning that's going on. I like the 10-foot wide sidewalk. You know, if we could go wider, that would be great. When I look at this plan, some of my concerns, I love the flower pots along the edge. I don't know if the city would, you know, what the maintenance on those kinds of things and the price to implement something that looks nice and beautiful like that would be. So I don't know how that space could be used, but that, you know, that essentially would give it a wider sidewalk there. I really like that the bike lanes are separated from the traffic. I prefer that. Kind of agree with Christine's comment on that, rather than being, you know, down next to the traffic lanes. A question about the bike lanes. It looks like you have one going each direction on each side. Did you guys think about, or what was the consideration for having the bike lanes maybe side by side and going bi-directional, and maybe then they can be 12 feet wide total or something, and save some spacing? Is there a reason you guys don't do it that way on this?
Yeah, so I don't know if Chris is still available to speak or not, but there's definitely
Yeah, I'm still here.
yeah, so, right, why don't you jump in on this
Yeah, yeah.
conversation around the two-way versus, yeah, it's great.
So a couple really, sorry guys, a couple really good points there. So, one thing I heard from the first commenter was about trip type, trip purpose, right? So, and then, Chris, you're talking about like, what's the configuration? I think the configuration is totally malleable. We do two-way protected bike lanes or cycle tracks on one side of the street. There are a few operational issues there that are solvable that have been solved in other places, but can do that. It tends to take a little less space. But if you look at that picture onto the kind of wrap all these things together. So with those wide sidewalks, right? And then with the sort of protected bike lanes, the cycle tracks, we're actually trying to do two things and maybe three, like pedestrian movements clearly and pedestrian permeability. But also we have kind of local destinations and we have what I call sub-regional destinations, right? So the station connection is an important connection over to Broadway and over to the Wellness District. And so that sort of dedicated bike facility type is really good for making those connections. And then that wide sidewalk, to the other commenter's point, like that can be shared, right? That can be a bike can use that to get to the local business on that area. Or say we end up with this configuration, one of the downsides is that you have to kind of cross the street. They're directional, right? So if you want to go, say, towards the station, you'd want to be on the north side of the street. And if you want to go away from the station, you're on the south side of the street. And so that gives it the opportunity for like, oh, I just want to go one block the other way and connect to something. So I guess Chris, to your point, I think we're open to all that. It's all doable. I think the key point is, facilities for by mode takes more space, right? But it sort of emphasizes modes and it gives you a little more visibility and I guess multimodal emphasis in the corridor. That's kind of the point, and higher level of safety too.
Yeah. So, Chris, does that answer your question? I think this, in this vision that we're, establishing here, there's definitely room to consider it either way. This is one way to go.
Yeah. And I guess I should have said too, Beth, if we did do like bi-directional on one side, it'd probably be on the north side for like shading issues, right? The sun issues and things to make sure it's stays ice-free and snow-free as much as possible. But those are all like maintenance and like design things a little down the road. And the vision is like the key thing. What are the elements we're playing with, right, Beth?
Yeah, and I think that's right, because whether it's two-way facility on one side or on either side, we're talking about accommodating comfortably pedestrians, some landscape and tree lawn, something to really bring in that green vegetation of some sort, bicycles in a safe manner that is comfortable for everyone, and then our parking vehicles and opportunities to really tighten up crossings and make things safe. I may go to a next picture here. And I know you have another comment, I think, Christine. This is the flower pots get a little Lego looking, but if you just kind of follow the idea that this just gives you that view that you can really, you want to create just a little bit of that friction to slow folks down and make them feel like they've arrived and that they aren't ripping through here anymore. And then the bulb outs and the tighter crossings are something that also can be implemented at whatever point along the corridor where needed. And that might be driven in part by the land use and the patterns that come to play. Yeah, Christine, did you have another comment there?
Question. So when we're looking at the aerial photos, most of it was parking lot. Are we assuming that almost all that parking is going away and the existing buildings are going away and then they'd be rebuilt like this more towards the street?
Okay, so it's a vision. So yeah, we are the zoning and the and John's previous work in this area does call for a more, we're calling it pedestrian scale or human scale mixed use development that really inspires that active street life, and maybe a little less big box, and you know, looking for those opportunities to activate the street. John, you're welcome to jump in on that. It doesn't, every block does not have to look like this. This is an example block.
Well, I think we can see the writing on the wall in the fact that so City Center has endured a number of different vacancies over the last few years, and this is only increasing to the areas to the east. And this has a lot to do with, there's just a lot of change in the real estate market. There's lots of changes in shopping patterns. There's so much more shopping is going online, and so many old retail companies that were doing so well 20 years ago are going into bankruptcy. So we kind of see the writing on the wall that that model is pretty much on its way out. And so we are planning for the future for this area to be with a lot more people living here, with smaller types of retail that is more service oriented, more restaurant oriented, and really trying to take advantage of the light rail for people to work downtown and then come back here without cars in the evening, and then spend their time and money here. So yes, the parking lots, service parking lots, we hear a lot that those are very unattractive. The Downtown Development Authority wants to see that go away. We want to see more of a structured parking instead of that. And then just something that's more activated with the buildings close to the street level, getting a lot more people walking back and forth here, and a much more attractive pedestrian environment with a great green element to it.
Thanks. I love that idea. Sounds like a good vision. I'm glad you're planning for that.
Let's plan for it.
I have a few smaller comments and a few bigger comments as they come to me. But one of the smaller ones, when someone brought up the flower pots, that does seem like a lot of maintenance each year, and it seems like they would almost have to be annuals. And I'm coming here from the Sustainability Commission, where this has been a hot topic of trying to move the city towards xeriscape perennials that are still flowery and colorful. So I wonder if instead of boxes, you could accomplish a similar goal by just making them a continuous strip that would have pretty xeriscape plants and some mulch or something like that.
Great idea. Yes.
Okay, one of the then bigger picture comments, I think you'd asked one of the questions about consistency of block versus block by block, or does each one have its own character? I think I would try to advocate towards more consistency, especially from the biking perspective, because a pet peeve, something it makes really difficult for a bike is if you're trying to find a path that's different from block to block to block, and then you have to turn right and re-find a path, and that's what we have to do now, and it is really a pain in the neck. So the more continuous, the better from a bicyclist perspective. And that would be physically continuous as well as visually continuous.
That's a great comment. I think that is a theme that we're really hearing from different folks. And not that it has to be the same, it's not a cookie cutter approach. It's just that you get that visual cue that you're there, you have that link, it's comfortable the whole way, you're not entering into anything unfamiliar. And that really will drive folks to use this street in a different way. So that's a good comment. Okay. Anyone else, or Chris, did you have another comment, or is that old hand?
I do have another comment. So looking at the design here, and just getting into some of the details, I'm not sure if I'll be able to make the next one, so I want to make sure it provides me, but thank you. looking at the bike path, you've got the benches next to the bike path between the bike path and the parking. And so for pedestrians to use that, they're going back and forth across the bike path. And so I was curious, like, I don't know what the reasoning was for 8 feet between the cars and the bike path, if that could be reduced and then maybe that sit down space added back over to the sidewalk. Or if there was a reason you had that distance between the bike path there. But I think that, you know, kind of going with Christine's comment, or if we're trying to add more green, you know, maybe narrowing that curve to bike path distance and putting that seating on the other side so they don't cross the bike path. Or if there was
Yeah,
a reason you had it that way.
Yeah, we can definitely look at how that works, what the operation of that is. And sometimes when we've done this on other streets, there are actually locations between that, in that amenity zone, where you walk across and you have that connection. The reason for the 8 feet is that we are finding, if we are interested in trees, and I know that that may not fall within our sustain, you know, we have a lot of things to balance here. Are trees sustainable? How much water do they take? They're not necessarily native vegetation in Colorado, but we do look to 7 to 8 feet in order to be able to sustain a tree canopy there. So we can't minimize that and still have a tree canopy. We cannot have a tree canopy and bring that down. So just some balances to think about that we can certainly, you know, collect info on and opinions.
Yeah, I feel like take the flower pots and put them next to the street if you need some distance between that and the bike lanes, but then put 8 feet between the bike and the sidewalk. I know that doesn't necessarily maybe allow for the trees to grow as big of a canopy because they'd be closer to the buildings, but some of the trees that grow better in this region don't have the big crowns and they're, you know, more vertical form, which that wouldn't be as much of an issue for. But that would also add some more leisure space next to the sidewalk, you know, places for people to rest rather than having to go back across and navigate the flowers over to the benches across the bike path.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, we can definitely look at the layout for sure. There and have a couple ways that it could be approached.
And I like seeing that mid-block crossing on there as well. And I'll hand it back. Thanks.
I wonder if you could get at Chris's more minor point about just moving the benches over to a pedestrian area, even if you keep the trees, which means keeping the 8 feet.
Yep.
And I think the trees are one of the top essential aspects of this entire thing and part of making it both enjoyable and continuous from Little Dry Creek.
We've heard a lot about trees. So I would agree. I think we would be remiss if we removed the trees from the vision, but certainly the other amenities and street lighting and the benches and where we create that pedestrian space can all be played with. So we can definitely kind of float a few of those around. Okay. Great. Well, if that's okay, I'm going to move us on because we have some of these we're going to come back to. This is just a great way to get into all of them, but I just want to hit a few more. Sorry. Yeah. So the green space itself, and this is sort of a little bit outside of the tree canopy, which is specific, we have heard, but we also heard a lot about, you know, removing the asphalt and re-greening. So what is that? And the questions we've asked of the folks we've talked to so far are, okay, when you say green, you know, what is that to you? Is it native green space? Is it a park? Is it a big park? What is it? Large scale, small scale? Is it natural space or a programmed space? Where does that fit in? So as we've asked those questions, this is what we've collected so far, is that in that civic center redevelopment there is that large park space, and that should be the civic park, and that through the rest of this corridor, we aren't looking for another huge park. We're looking for sort of an integrated park space that kind of ties into development. Maybe there are things like pocket parks, We heard dog park. I know that's a little controversial, but that idea that we're weaving green into the development as it occurs, not just another big giant park. So just that's a big one to take away. That is what we've heard so far. Yes, on the tree canopy. Sustainable, native, water efficient. I think those are good things for us to remember. And then this idea of we've kind of talked about this continuous green. So where possible and however we can do that, just thinking of it as really a re-greening, publicly accessible, and where needed, addressing water quality, which is, it doesn't have to be absolutely everywhere. So that is what we've heard so far on our comments. And that has led us to this idea, these kinds of images. So let's talk about these a little bit. There are ways you can sort of integrate green space. And in this case, I see that is lawn, right? But it's small, it's between buildings. It's sort of that pocket park feeling that ties in with development. That's a place for people to relax and be, but it's not a massive park. Again, it can be vegetated. It could be trees in between buildings or threaded through the area. The one on the end is sort of that linear park, maybe tied to the sidewalk or the trail, maybe a pocket park. Those are those ideas. And then these were other things that had come up in the conversation. We heard some things about flowers and flowers that reflect the history of the area, or even are tied to colors of Cinderella City. We've heard all kinds of things. So that flower component, integrating that tree canopy and vegetation, and then, is that a formal thing or is it more natural grasses and flowers throughout the area? So we don't have to pick our plant life specifically in the vision, but so we don't want to get too hung up on it, but just this notion of being resilient and sustainable in the type of vegetation we choose, and really our understanding of trees and green space is really what kind of needs to come through in the vision. So if anyone has particular comments on this aspect of park space.
Will you
Yeah,
go back
Christine.
one slide?
Sure.
One thing I like about the picture on the right compared to almost every other picture is it's not exactly just straight lines. Seems like most of the rest of the design is squares and rectangles, and I like the slightly more natural look of the third one, to the degree possible. If we could have some more flowing biophilic design instead of just squares and rectangles.
Brad, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, just one thing, kind of piggyback on what Christine said earlier too, is within the green spaces and everything, let's just make sure that we pay special attention on to the maintenance of it. A lot of the things that we're doing right now for our Parks Master Plan is definitely putting in a lot of native areas that's replacing turf and everything, and that's part of our sustainability plan that we're doing too. But one of the concerns from the Parks Department is definitely the maintenance part of it and who's going to be taking care of that.
Great comment. But both from a maintenance perspective and also sort of removing the turf, from a sustainability perspective too. Great.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. Maybe we keep moving. This is just another aspect. There's another piece of this that kind of ties in, and I think it would be nice to talk about. Let's just talk about trails. Now, this is an interesting idea, and it doesn't have to be part of the vision, but it's been talked about a little bit, and so I want to throw this out there and get your feedback. So mobility and connectivity through the site is critical, and to the neighboring locations. Okay, so and to this point in the evening, we've talked about bikes and pedestrians and sidewalks and shared spaces and everything. But there's also this notion of these urban trails. And we had heard along the way some thoughts around, oh, if we could weave green and have trails. It's not always that easy to weave that into your urban space, but it's an idea. And it also ties to this visual connection between the station downtown and the wellness district. So I'm throwing out a few thoughts, and you just kind of tell us what you think. One notion of the trail is that we have Little Dry Creek connecting through the site. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And that is one type of trail. And that is, it's a local trail. It's a regional trail connection. It links other trails. Great. Another idea is, in addition to that, is that we have this idea of urban trail, which is really kind of like a sidewalk, but it's marked and it's visible, and it comes with certain characteristics that might even play into, they can play into health and wellness, they can play into placemaking. We've heard a lot about senior friendly, and so is wayfinding, treatments, and visibility of a sidewalk, could that be transferred to become sort of more of an urban trail? So this is just a question for you, okay? Because we can drop this notion entirely, but we have gotten some feedback on it. So this is a sidewalk, but it could also be considered more of an urban trail. It has certain elements to it, certain features. Sometimes it's marked in a certain way. The one in the middle in particular is an aspen, and does kind of get to that notion of less squares and boxes and a little bit more of the play or fluidity of our facilities. The one on the right is, has a distinct pattern. That's their urban trail. Oh, sorry, I thought we had a couple more there. There are the Indianapolis Cultural Trail, if you've seen pictures of that, which I don't think we have in here tonight, but that's that's a trail that carries with it certain aspects of Indianapolis. So picking up on that culture. So you can have elements of Englewood, you can have markers, you can have wayfinding, you can tie to wellness, whatever. So let's just pause for a minute and just talk about this idea a little bit. And if this is something that has any merit, or if we don't need to go this far, we just need to have a nice sidewalk. Okay. Oh, Brenda, it's a new name. Let's hear from Brenda.
Hi. Yeah, so my thoughts about the area and the trail. I'm sorry, do I get to talk? The host keeps muting me.
No.
Okay.
I'm trying to mute myself and it wants to mute
Oh,
everybody.
okay.
I'm sorry.
All right, well, I will mute myself when I'm done. But yeah, this area used to be a long time ago, a park. And I am familiar with the parks bond that I hope we get. So trails getting from one end to the other to do a couple things. To get from Little Dry Creek to the Dartmouth bike path, and also that park, Cushing Park. And also a bike, a trail could be used to break up what we may end up with are these city blocks of residences, and to somehow break that up and get people to move through it would be, I think, really nice. I don't have any particular preference for style, but definitely bringing a way to bringing nature back in to this area. Not a lot of grass, but trees. And we did want to find out, the creek goes through that area. It is difficult to, I know, have it come back into the shopping area, especially since we have those properties that are owned by the other party, the Big Lots and the Hobby Lobby. But any way we could bring these paths to get us from the northwest to the southeast without having to go around buildings would be, I think, would be a nice design feature.
Yeah, yeah, I love that idea. And they could be urban trails, or they could just be sidewalks with some natural vegetation. You know, it doesn't have to be termed an urban trail, but I do like what you're getting at is sort of being able to move. I like breaking up those blocks, moving between things. It kind of builds into our next piece, which is the connectivity element of things. Really nice. Christine, do you want to go next?
Could I echo what Brenda said? I agree totally. If you could go back 2 slides.
Mhm.
That one is absolutely my favorite. One more, that one.
This one? Uh-huh.
Something like that is what I would really like to see. I give it 1,000,000 votes. And I like the other as well. So not this instead of an urban trail. Or possibly some sort of hybrid. If we did do an urban trail, like on the next slides, I would want to make sure that it's wider than a sidewalk. In other words, it would be wide enough for an elderly couple going out for a stroll and a family going for a bike ride. Both, not sidewalk width. And as continuous as possible. But this would be the dream that would connect our key parts, and this would be something Englewood would really be proud of. It would be something we could point to. It would give us some identity. This would just be amazing. This or the other urban trail type things. The rest plan parts are fine, but this would be amazing.
Awesome, great. Chris, did I see? Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. I keep feeling like I want to comment on some things, and then you show us more, and I said, oh, that's where I was going to go with it. I love it too. Brenda had a great point, and I was going to bring it up too. Used to be a park, turned into a giant mall. The water went underground. And if I really had like my ideal input on this, I would love to see that come back up in something like what we're looking at here. You know, maybe not as expansive. We still need some buildings there, but
Right.
You know, the idea of the curve and the creek going through Englewood has such a history and even current day with water, you know, being an important part of the community in the South Platte, and really connecting that dry creek all the way through. And the idea of the, you know, kind of urban trail, you know, doing something a little different too there would I think would be really great for the area. And, you know, being able to tie it into the city center, kind of a little bit bigger chunk of park over there, but also, you know, Cushing Park is right down the street, and that's where the connection is to the South Platte as well. So as we look at the idea of the trail, you guys are the pros on this stuff, but you know, figuring out how to make that stuff connect. Maybe there's a line in the trail. Light rail station obviously is important. There's some buildings there that are not going to be moving anytime soon as well. But if it's more longer term, I would love to see something like that come to fruition, where, you know, even if it's not the whole way through with the water connection, some elements of it would be great. And the idea of the trail, you know, something consistent through there, and to echo Christine's comment, something that's substantial enough that, you know, I used the word promenade earlier. It doesn't have to be quite, you know, as fancy as that, but really something that's big enough that you can fit a family and a family of bikes, and of, you know, family walking with, you know, kids with their hands out to the side all through the area, along with some benches on the side for people to stop as well. So, you know, if we're really talking big picture, and when we were talking earlier and about the bike lanes, part of my question about why are they together or not apart is the idea of this sort of trail going through there was kind of my underlying ask on that. So
yeah, so I really like where that's going, because I think it helps us understand there is room, or there's thought around both. I mean, the bike facility on Englewood Parkway, I think, is an important piece of the multimodal character of that street and changing the character of that street. And so, but that is a bike facility, right? And it's safer that if it didn't combined, and it's great. But this is a little bit different idea, and I was curious if this sits with you guys, and it sounds like, you know, this is that winding natural part of greening this area, especially along Little Dry Creek, maybe, if that's possible. So, yeah, so, and there's room for both, of course. So maybe that's a good answer.
Yeah, and I also just wanted to say I really support the idea of, you know, maybe smaller pocket parks, things between buildings, as this might fit into the broader planning that's going on with redevelopment of these areas. You know, I don't know if there's something that would be recommended here that could say there's a certain percentage of the redevelopment that has to include a small park area or something. But you know, that sort of concept, I like that as well. Doesn't have to be significant like you showed in those pictures, but you know, something interesting as a public space as part of each of those redevelopments, which also would help lessen the burden on what the city has to work with as part of this plan as well. Thanks.
Okay, let's go to, we have one more, I think. Let's just see if we can't hit, we have a couple more, but we're okay, two more. But these are kind of all coming together now because we've talked about a number of things. So we'll just sort of go, this is this idea of connectivity, and I think we have, oh, hello, okay, all right. Didn't like that. Okay, let's go here, and I think we have touched on this, and but let's just kind of walk through it just to kind of formalize that there are some things that we can do in addition to just increasing the multimodal comfort, which is top of the list, but there are things we can do to also sort of influence connectivity, and by that it's less about the facilities and more about access and visible connections, and really making that through connectivity, you know, through the whole site. So linking to the surrounding districts or adjacent neighborhoods. And so let's just talk about this a little bit. These were the questions we started to ask people. Sometimes strengthening the street grid or reinserting a stronger street grid can be part of just that alternative connectivity through an area. It doesn't have to be big streets, it's just not big blocks. So here's what we heard is a visible link, of course, between the station downtown and the wellness districts. So that idea is just prevalent every time we turn around. Strengthening connectivity through street grid, or I liked Brenda's idea through trail connections or linkages between uses. So it doesn't have to be street grid. But the idea is really maybe breaking down that block size some, and that's probably pretty important to really increasing connectivity through the area. And that happens through redevelopment, where we integrate those connections. Potentially reconfiguring the roundabout into more of a compact intersection. And while that is a formal pedestrian bike movement conversation as well, it also can be part of that visible connection and establishing that stronger connectivity. Really drawing people in, increasing connectivity from the station, of course. And then in this picture, we're just illustrating that Little Dry Creek connection as a future greenway from the Dry Creek that you see there today up through the site, across some of those redevelopment opportunities, and connecting there along Floyd over to the Platte. So while we're not kind of diving into that too deeply this evening, but that link is part of the connectivity theme. And this picture, this is just an image of, you know, what do we mean by that Little Dry Creek serving as that missing link in sort of a broader picture of adjacent trails and trail connectivity for the region. So, and I think we've talked about that some. And I think that those other pictures with the green and the trail, and that can all be part of the visualization of what that Little Dry Creek connection potentially could look like. Okay, this is our sort of last one, and I think we should kind of get through it so that we can make sure we don't keep you too long, and then we can kind of take last comments. But this is our placemaking conversation, and this kind of gets to how do we think about land use and how do we think about the character of the area. And one of the thing we asked is City Center a unique district? Is it part of the Civic Center? Is it part of downtown? What is it? And I know you guys had produced a placemaking guide in 2021. Some of the terminology referred to there was a wooded nook. So that's just something to throw out there. We've heard some about historic ties to Cinderella City. Is that part of our placemaking? Is it a gathering space? So just some different things that we've asked along the way. Things we've heard, yes, it should be a unique district with its own identity that is visually linked to the other districts. When you come through here, you should kind of start to get that sense of discovery. So that it isn't, we don't get a sense of discovery when we look at the parking lots, right? So what are the things that draw you in? Our colors, maybe use of colors. We've heard that in flowers. We've heard it in other things. It should be a destination in and of itself, or series of destinations, not a drive-through. And part of all that is really that mixed use pedestrian scale orientation that creates that active space. So with that, we've already touched on this. We didn't know how much we'd talk about this in the beginning. So yes, what are the elements of it? And I know we've had a lot of comments on these diagrams. So I think that for the most part is the last component of the kinds of things we want to talk about. Okay. And these are some of the images from your placemaking guide. These kinds of things can be part of that picture, but it's more than just putting a flag in the pole, in the ground. It's utilizing your wayfinding, creating your color consistency, tying it to your street design, and integrating the land use. So these are all the pieces that have to come together to really create that sense of place. So, which I think as we vision that's where the whole thing takes us, to this becoming a place. So on that note, does anyone have comments on this last component, the placemaking component? Christine, is your hand up or is that old hand?
No, it's new, but it was from the slide about the roundabouts and the blocks.
Oh yeah, sure, go ahead.
The roundabouts, I do think they have their place, but the ones that are there now, or the one that's there now, is probably too big, like you started off by saying, doesn't fit the scale of these streets. But I wouldn't rule out a little mini roundabout that would just have some flowers or a tree in the middle. And that leads into my next thought, which is about the smaller block size. I kind of get what you're getting at there, but that more blocks mean more cars and more stop signs. And if you are trying to bike through there and you have to stop every single stop street, or even as a pedestrian waiting for the cars to let you by, that's annoying as heck. So making more blocks and therefore more cars makes me a little nervous.
Yeah, that's a good comment. Yeah, for sure. Down. All right. Is there anything else on just this notion of the placemaking? In my mind, the placemaking element really evolves as you deal with all these other pieces, right? You kind of start to visualize where things can go and what are the important components of it. So it's certainly not one we have to solve tonight. It's something that can come out over the next weeks as these pieces come together.
Seems like the main part of that would need to be integrated from the outset is the wooded nook vision, which is more about the layout, and then the exact style of signage I think could come later.
Yeah. Okay. We can dive into the wooded nook idea a little bit further. All right, great. Okay, so let's just go to our last is, yes, so these were the themes, that we started to have the conversation under. In order to build this vision, these were sort of the pieces we wanted to walk through with you. If you have other elements of the vision that you want us to dive into a little bit or look at as we go, please just, put them in the chat or raise your hand. They don't all have to fit into these buckets, but these were the buckets that were starting to emerge as the primary. Christine, did you have something on that?
Yeah, sorry, I guess I'm very opinionated tonight.
Okay,
I
good.
think these buckets are very appropriate. I like them all. I think the
Okay.
examples, I don't love the examples since most of the pictures, I understand they're just photos that we pulled for examples. Most all the pictures, I would be really scared to bike there as a bicyclist. They seem to do really good on wide sidewalks. There's
Yeah.
cars, there's always cars. There's room for parking because there's always room for parking. But it seems like bicyclists get squeezed out, like in that top left corner. If you look at that little bicyclist following right behind the truck's exhaust and then being squeezed in that other car and possibly hit by that other car. So that worries, the examples worry me, but the buckets themselves seem very good.
Yeah, they're each examples of specific things. Not the it's challenging, right, to bring all the pieces together. And I think that is one of the issues we always face with bikes, is how do we do that safely in a way that allows people to move, but gives you all these other pieces that you want to be part of the street. So, but our vision and our work doesn't have to be the same as these pictures. So we can have our own.
Right. And just a little tidbit, that one image on the top left is from the downtown plan. And so that's probably more of for like a Broadway type scene that's, extremely pedestrian oriented. And, maybe Englewood Parkway is a little different than that. It's its own thing.
I recognized it from that. I know I'd seen it before, and it worried me at that time too. It still does, that this would be anywhere in Englewood and that you'd be expected to bike within those 2 inches.
Yeah. Well, I think when we talk about the parkway, we just keep coming back to safety for all, the balance of users and modes. And that's what we're hearing distinctly. So, and that's what we're working towards. So I think that addresses some of those, and we'll see how this all materializes. So, okay. So, with that, just to round us out for the night, and John, feel free to jump in and share anything else on your mind. But we will be taking all the feedback we heard tonight. We're massaging this, right? And we'll massage our images a little bit. We'll tweak that model some, get that to shape up a little, and look at, we'll work with Chris and our traffic engineering team to just really kind of look at that configuration. What are the options for getting all those parts and pieces in there and doing so safely? We have a public meeting on May 18th. Again, that's a virtual meeting, so it'll be somewhat similar to this format, with some updated materials. And then following that input, we're really working toward developing the final report on things, which will just lay this all out and really hopefully paint that picture of the vision of where things need to go, along with those short-term improvements. John, anything else you want to add there?
No, I don't think so. Thank you. But the only thing I would add is that I really appreciate this great feedback. I wish there's a few more people here tonight, but I think we had some of the best people in the invitee list that came here, and the feedback was great. So thank you very much.
All right. Does
If you're
anyone have any? Yeah, go ahead.
The short term part, I'm really glad to see the whole vision, and I wonder if I could add a couple comments about the short term part now that we see the bigger picture.
For sure.
I think it's a good start, and I wonder if there's ways we could revise the short term to lead into the long term instead of drawing some lines and putting up some posts that don't lead us towards this eventual vision. I guess what I'm worried about is that sometimes long-term plans don't happen and only short-term plans happen. And I know, I mean, you listed some studies that are like 16 years old. So I want to make sure we're at least taking steps towards the long term, especially considering it seems like we have a once in a lifetime opportunity to get a whole ton of funding from the Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act and so forth that we might not have in the long term. I know it takes a lot of time and effort to apply for federal grants, but every darn day I'm seeing emails about funding available from the federal government for multimodal, for community connection. So I guess maybe there's a medium term in here, something between short term that you can almost literally do tomorrow and long term that might be a decade out and might never ever happen.
Yeah, good comment. Agreed. Yeah, I think that because the vision encapsulates the land use pattern and the right of way available, and there's kind of a lot that goes into it. We can certainly look at short-term improvements that are, that aren't just throwaway, that are something that puts us in step with the next piece. And are certainly aligned with the vision. So we definitely can do that. And then we have to kind of work with that redevelopment opportunity as well. It's an important part of it. So yes, okay, Brenda, and then Chris.
Well, yeah, to piggyback on what Christine said, with the temporary plan. Oh, something that came to mind is exploring what patterns are throughout that area. We can go forward and put a bike path going west at that turnabout, or we could, because here's what I really suspect, or if you were to, observe how people use that, they're coming from Cushing Park, I'm pretty sure. And maybe our short-term plan might be to experiment and see if people, instead of keep going west all the way down the light rail, go up to Cushing Park. We need a little bit more room, I think, along Floyd. But if that's if that's something we want to explore, then maybe that should be from the King Super, so to speak, to the roundabout north on Cherokee to Floyd behind the Walmart. That's that long-term path you showed me. Maybe we should make that, see if bikers like that. I don't see them. People come off the light rail, but they go right to the Walmart most often. That whole area in front of big Hobby Lobby is kind of a no man's land anyway, so I don't know if we want to, it doesn't hurt, but I think more people use Floyd than they use that Englewood Parkway area. That's just my thought.
Yeah, and I think Floyd has been a topic of conversation for that kind of movement for a while. So yeah, definitely Floyd aligns with the long-term vision as well, Yeah. Great comment. Okay. Maybe Chris?
All right, thanks. I appreciate the short-term stuff, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of that implemented, especially some of the easy stuff, striping projects and some of the poles. I hope that it's not too onerous and doesn't get too much pushback for some of the local businesses, but I think the community will find that well received. And I know you're working with those RTD routes, especially east-west there, the north-south on that roundabout is much less traffic than the east-west there. But one of the other things that to piggyback a little bit on what Brenda said, and I won't be too repetitive here, but connection over to Cushing Park and to the trail down there to the south flat. If we're working on a long-term vision plan, let's put something in that's going to be really great. Currently, if you're looking down Galapago, you see a giant brick wall. You can't even tell there's this great park over there. It's got an amphitheater, a skate park, and a pond, and a big field. It's wonderful. And there's no chance you can even see it because there's a giant brick wall there. So if there was, looking at your perimeter on your study area, Galapago north of Floyd is not part of that. But I think just that whole idea of maybe that street, or on the far side, the RTD parking lot, maybe, that up to Dartmouth as something that's very tangential, but, very important to what you're doing within the perimeter that you showed on the graphic.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Those two areas are kind of like a really important connection to two great parts of the city, the trail and stuff. So I don't know if that's out of scope, but I would love to see at least something kind of tie that in there.
Yeah.
And
Great.
I think that kind of goes with the idea of, the wooded nook or urban, all of these different ideas that we have. But we talked about the concept of these pocket parks and sort of more public spaces. Maybe
Right.
there's and it doesn't always have to be continuous either. It can be wide by the light rail station, and maybe it narrows down for a block or two, and then we have the chance to open it up and have more space kind of along there, or something creative like that. I think would be great, and to tie that in with the park down the street. Just a couple of things that we hadn't touched on.
Excellent.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys hanging on. I know I talked a lot on the call too, so sorry if I was
All good. It's great.
long-winded, but thank you guys. I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
It's very good. We really appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, no one has brought up Cushing Park so far in any of our
I know.
meetings, so that's really nice to hear that.
That's right. All right. Well, maybe with that, we'll close up. John, if you're in agreement. And we will see you on the 18th if you decide to attend the public meeting. We'll hopefully get some folks weighing in on some of these things as well. And we'll start to incorporate all the conversation we had this evening.
When is that meeting on the 18th? What time, and is it virtual or in
I think
person?
it's virtual, and I want to say it's at 6 p.m. It's just like this meeting, basically, with updated information. Anything else, John?
Yes, the public meeting will be on the 18th, and it'll be virtual, 6 p.m. This is going to be our chance to hear from everyday citizens, similar to this format. And with that, I think we should wrap up.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a good night.
All right, good night.
Hey, thanks, John. Talk to you
Yes,
tomorrow.
thanks. It was a good job. I'm a little disappointed that we only had 3 people participate. I guess that's a learning lesson there, that if it's not on their normal night, you
Yeah.
might not get them. So,
Yep. I agree.
but we did get pretty good feedback, I thought.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Yeah, only
Alright.
3 people, but maybe the most comments yet. So that's a
Yeah.
plus.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
right,
And you
thanks.
guys have a good night.
Yep. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.